To my surprise, there are actually a lot of people in the United States, in the UK, in the Western world are really interested in learning about China's political system. And joining me today is Danny Haiphong, who is a writer, an independent journalist who has always been closely following with the two sessions. And today, he's gonna tell us why. Hello, Danny. And can you tell us more about yourself?
Sure. So I contribute to a publication called Black Agenda Report, and I also co-edit Friends of Socialist China. We're actually having a very interesting event about China and Latin America and the relationship between the two and their relations in regard to 21st century socialism on March
I
19th.
don't know whether it's just me because I feel like over these years there are more communists in the United States. I see different communist groups, communist parties in different states in USA. I mean, does that like it's growing in the United States? Like more people, more Americans are becoming communists. Is that really so?
There is a increased interest in the United States with socialism. That is for sure. So there is this broad interest that has been sparked by the last 10 years of economic crisis, of the fact that the United States' governance system has only facilitated more and more economic inequality and has made, especially for young people, young working people, has made their lives a lot harder. There's a lot of indebtedness, student loan debt, healthcare debt, rent is very high. The cost of living is skyrocketing with this Ukraine-Russia war and increased U.S. sanctions on Russia. The price of energy now is skyrocketing. So the cost of living, the standard of living in the United States for young workers, young working people, has declined significantly over the last several decades. And that has led to moments like Occupy Wall Street in 2011, the Bernie Sanders campaigns of 2016, 2020. Those political moments, those political developments has led to a renewed interest in socialism. And so with that, there has been an increased interest in communist parties, and there has been increased membership in parties such as the Communist Party USA, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and other organizations, the Democratic Socialists of America, right? Other socialist organizations that in some respects identify with communism. And all of this is a byproduct of just the wide gap between how the US government speaks about itself in the United States as a society and how it meets the interests of all people versus the reality for young working people, workers as a whole. And the fact that it is becoming quite obvious that spending 768 billion on the US military, allowing these private financial institutions, something you never see in China, right? There would not be mega huge financial institutions plundering the wealth of ordinary people openly and being caught doing so without punishment. And actually, the United States government actually provides subsidies to these corporations in for the forms of things like quantitative easing. So these corporations, these banks are too big to fail. Well, there are people in the United States now, increasingly so, wanting an alternative. What is the alternative to this? How do we have a situation where there's justice and these corporations are held into account? And I think the example of socialism and of the communist ideal and the communist movement provides that kind of alternative. And then now you have a rising China, which I think there is more interest with all of the hatred. One of the contradictions is all of the hatred, all of the aggression, all of the hostile policies that are leveled onto China by the United States and the West has actually also, I believe, increased interest among younger people, among progressive thinking people in China, for better and for worse, right? Interest in whether they should support these policies or not, as well as interest in, well, what is the truth about China? I think there is a lot more interest over the last several years because of this new Cold War orientation, and it leads to people thinking, well, is China's system superior? Is in many ways, is it superior in the sense that it actually is getting things done for people, is serving the people, right? That question is one that I think many more people are thinking about, and it is influencing their interest in socialism with Chinese characteristics and socialism and then ultimately communism.
I remember we got connected through Twitter a few years ago. You told me you actually watched my vlog about how I covered the two sessions in 2019. I was really surprised someone really from the United States was watching this vlog that I just shared, like behind the scenes stories about two sessions. Like, how come you really interested in learning about all this?
So China's political system is critically important right now, given the fact that China's leadership position in the world has grown significantly over the past few decades alone, and especially over the last decade, where China has been able to meet incredible markers and goals. For example, the elimination of extreme poverty in November of 2020. And China really right now is the only major economy in position to actually achieve certain goals, especially in relation to economic growth, to addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, and working toward domestic priorities such as bridging the gap between rural and urban areas economically, as well as meeting and continuing to work toward climate change goals and climate reduction goals, such as becoming a carbon neutral country in 2060. So I think China's two sessions are so important to follow, and its political system so important to follow because China has a record of being able to actually achieve goals that it sets out. And we need to understand how that political system works because I think it offers many lessons to the world, especially in a period where I live in the United States and I see how there is so much talk here about change and how certain priorities and policies need to be enacted. But oftentimes, when those policies are geared toward the people, they end up stalled. They end up not happening at all. And actually, the policies that do go through end up not benefiting ordinary people so much. So I'm interested in a system that is working toward goals like common prosperity, which has become a frequently used term in China and among China's governance system. And so I think it's so important to share interest and curiosity in this system in order for us to have a better understanding here in the United States and the West of how we should relate to China and how we should ultimately counter a lot of the things that are said about China in the Western media and the US political establishment, which just don't align with reality.
I think we do notice there are a lot of fear mongering about China, towards China, among not just in America, probably in the general Western media coverage. And while most people think China is very totalitarian or just oppressed states, I mean, as a Chinese, who when I read all those reports, I was like, really? That's just, is it really the country that I'm living in? So it's very different from the reality. But how come you are like in the United States, you have all this coverage around you all the time, and how come you're still not afraid of China's system and still want to learn about it?
Well, I think there are two factors. One, I was able to go to China right before the pandemic and see how China's governance system actually produces results for the people. So I was able to see the massive amounts of renewable energy investment that exists everywhere in rural areas and urban areas. I was able to see how infrastructure development and high-speed rail, I was able to go on two high-speed rail lines traveling across the country about 700 kilometers. And so I was able to see how China's governance system directly produces results for the people. And then there's the fact that I live in the United States and I have experienced over the last 20 plus years the decline in living standards and this obsession with war and investing in the military and ultimately propping up a governance system which serves the 1% and serves corporations and the richest Americans first at the expense of everyone else. And so that only piques my curiosity more when become aware of a system that does it differently. And then when we get down to the nuts and bolts or the ways in which China's governance system works and operates, it becomes even more interesting to me because you have right now two sessions happening where the NPC, not many people know this, is made of thousands of deputies. I think around 3,000 deputies, which have a demonstrated record starting at the very lowest level of governance, at the village level, at the township level, moving all the way up. But all of these deputies have a demonstrated record of serving the people, and it's a meritocratic system where elections actually do occur at the very lowest level, and then they continue to happen among each body to eventually select deputies at the national level, which represent the various ethnic groups, interest groups, community groups, those institutions which understand both what's happening at the national level and at the lowest local level so that there can be proper consultation, that there can be proper application of policy that takes into account the wide-ranging and varied interests of so many different sectors of society. And I think that's such a unique system because I live in the United States where the lowest level of governance, city council, municipality, really doesn't have any relationship to the federal level. There really isn't that consultation that happens. And this isn't even to say that at the governance system here in the United States, you have actually corporations and private wealth really speaking first and really influencing politics first instead of the interests of the people. And I think China's system, being a whole process people's democracy, really does ensure that there are checks in place and that there are ways in which everyone can be involved, both in direct participation as well as this consultation process, which is very unique and it gives China both the capacity to involve people, but also to get things done very quickly, which the United States and the West, I think, are struggling with mightily. There's elections that happen, and people can be involved with their vote when they're allowed to, because there's a lot of suppression here as well. But at the policy level, it doesn't always translate into their interests, the people's interests, being manifested in reality or actually being met in reality.